So today, we're going to dive into the epic, complex, and, let's be honest, often contradictory story of how a subcontinent of diverse kingdoms and cultures was forged into the single modern nation we know as India.
I mean, that's a huge question, right? And for India, the answer is this incredible story of imperial collapse, colonial conquest, and a kind of unintended awakening that would literally change the world. Our story begins in a time of chaos and opportunity.
All right, let's rewind to the 18th century. The mighty Mughal Empire, which had dominated the subcontinent for centuries, was basically falling apart. And this created a massive power vacuum, which meant new regional powers started surging to fill the void.
Just look at this timeline. You can really see a land in total flux. The Mughal decline, which kicks off with Aurangzeb's death in 1707, wasn't some clean break. It was more like a slow, messy fracturing. You see the Marathas rising, first grabbing economic power in 1719, and then by 1740 they've built this huge empire. But then, bam, their dream of ruling all of India gets shattered at the Battle of Panipat in 1761. Meanwhile, up north, Ranjit Singh is building a powerful Sikh state in Punjab. The key takeaway here is simple. 18th century India wasn't one single thing. It was a mosaic of competing powers.
So into this complete chaos sails this new kind of power, one that didn't start as a kingdom, but as a corporation, the British East India Company. And as you'll see, it would change absolutely everything.
I mean, think about this transformation for a second. The company shows up in India with a pretty simple goal: make a profit. But over a couple of centuries, it completely pivots from just trading goods to conquering territory, using all that political instability to become an imperial ruler. This was literally a corporate takeover on a continental scale.
So how on earth did a company pull this off? Well, it came down to a few critical, decisive moves. The Battle of Plassey in 1757. It was less a battle and more of a backroom deal, a conspiracy, that gave the company control over Bengal, India's wealthiest province. 8 years later, the Battle of Buxar really sealed the deal. But the real masterstroke, the truly clever part, was what they set up in 1765, the dual system.
And here's the brutal genius of it. The company took the Diwani, that's the right to collect all the taxes and control all the money, all the power. Then they left the Nizamat, the actual work of running the place and keeping order, to the local Nawab. But, and this is the key, they gave him zero resources to actually do it. So the company had all the power and none of the responsibility. It was a recipe for disaster that led to a total administrative breakdown and the ruthless exploitation of Bengal.
And this quote from Karl Marx, man, it just perfectly captures the economic devastation. British policies were deliberately designed to dismantle India's world-famous textile industry. They flooded the Indian market with cheap, machine-made British goods, which basically destroyed the livelihoods of millions of Indian weavers and artisans. This wasn't just conquest, it was a systematic deindustrialization.
Okay, but here's where the story takes a fascinating, ironic twist. The very tools the British used to control and exploit India would end up unintentionally sowing the seeds of a brand new, unified, national identity.
I mean, just think about the irony here. The British build railways to move their troops and raw materials faster. But those railway cars become these incredible melting pots, where an Indian from Punjab might sit next to someone from Bengal, someone of a different caste, and they'd start to realize they shared a common reality under British rule. The British introduced English education to create a class of loyal clerks to help them run the place. But instead, they create an intelligentsia that's reading about liberty and democracy and starting to ask, hey, why don't we get some of that? And the modern press? It becomes the perfect tool to spread these new ideas all over the subcontinent.
So all of this stuff coming together sparked this massive social and intellectual awakening. A new class of Indians started to look inward, questioning age-old traditions like the caste system, while at the same time looking outward to challenge the very legitimacy of foreign rule.
You can really break this Indian Renaissance down into a few key pillars. You had these powerful movements pushing for major social reform. You had a new emphasis on rational thought, inspired by things like the French Revolution, that encouraged people to question everything. And all of this together built a new sense of national pride and confidence, which laid the perfect intellectual groundwork for the freedom struggle that was about to come.
And this newfound confidence? It wasn't just going to stay in books and debating societies. Pretty soon, it exploded into organized political action and, for the very first time, mass movements that challenged the British Raj head-on.
The first massive shockwave to hit the British system came in 1857.
Led by incredible figures like the Reni of Jhansi, what started as a military mutiny just exploded into this huge popular uprising. And even though it was brutally crushed, it completely shattered the myth of British invincibility. It was really the violent, bloody beginning of India's long fight for freedom.
After the revolt, things started getting more organized. And this is where you see this fascinating evolution inside the Indian National Congress, which was founded in 1885. On one hand, you had the early leaders, the so-called moderates. They believed in a slow, gradual process. Writing petitions, making polite requests, aiming for slow reform. But by 1905, a whole new generation, the extremists, had had enough. They were done asking. Their methods were direct action, boycotts, mass mobilization, and their goal wasn't just reform, it was Swaraj, complete and total self-rule.
And the first real test of this new, more aggressive approach, the Swadeshi movement. When the British decided to partition the province of Bengal in 1905, which everyone saw as a clear attempt to divide Hindus and Muslims, the response was electric. People all over India started boycotting British goods, they started their own national schools, and they promoted Indian industries. This was a huge step in turning the freedom struggle into a real mass movement.
And then Gandhi arrives on the scene, and he just completely changes the game. Before him, the independence movement was largely an elite affair, educated men writing petitions and having debates. Gandhi took the idea of mass struggle and gave it a powerful new weapon, satyagraha, or nonviolent civil disobedience. He brought peasants, workers, and women into the fight, transforming the freedom struggle from a movement of the classes into a movement of the masses that reached every single corner of India.
So, with Gandhi's movement, independence wasn't a question of if anymore, but when. But the final chapter of this story, well, it was going to be written in blood, as the dream of a united, free India collided with the tragic reality of division.
And you can see on this timeline, the seeds of that division were planted way, way earlier. You have the founding of the Muslim League in 1906, creating a separate political platform. But the real turning point, the point of no return really, came in 1909 with the introduction of something called separate electorates. By 1940, the demand for a completely separate nation was official policy for the League, which set the stage for that final, tragic decision in 1947.
So what exactly were these separate electorates? Well, it's a pretty simple and pretty insidious idea. It meant that Muslims could only vote for Muslim candidates, and Hindus could only vote for Hindu candidates, and so on. It politically baked religious identity right into the system, turning communities into competing political teams. Many historians see this as a textbook example of the British divide and rule strategy, a deliberate way to weaken a united nationalist movement.
And this leads to the most heartbreaking question in this whole story. After fighting for so long for one united, independent India, why on earth did the leaders of the Indian National Congress, people who had worked with Gandhi for decades, agree to tear it in two?
Well, the answer seems to be that they were facing an unbearable choice between terrible options. The initial British plan could have led to the balkanization of India, splintering it into dozens of weak, feuding little states. Faced with that chaos, and with horrific communal violence spiraling out of control into what they feared would be a full-blown civil war, they made a terrible choice. Partition was seen as a tragic, bitter price to pay, the price for getting a strong, stable, and independent India, and for preventing an even greater catastrophe.
And so, that's how India was born, a nation forged in the fire of a common struggle against a foreign power, yet born at the very moment of its own division. And the legacy of that profound contradiction, well, it's something that continues to shape the destiny of a subcontinent and its people to this very day.